Around midnight on April 23, 2013, on a deserted stretch of Alcantarly Road in New Orleans, USA, the stillness of the night was suddenly shattered by the sharp crack of gunfire. The dry, unmistakable sound of bullets echoed through the quiet darkness before fading back into an eerie silence. Just minutes later, a passerby named James Mousseau was walking through the nearby McCoy Street neighborhood when he stumbled upon a horrifying scene. A middle-aged man lying motionless in a roadside drainage ditch, his body still, his clothes soaked in fresh blood. Recognizing the severity of the situation, James immediately called emergency services, his voice frantic in the quiet of the late night. However, by the time the New Orleans Police Department's rapid response team arrived at the scene, it was already too late. The man had drawn his final breath, leaving behind a cold and mysterious crime scene. Based on initial observations, the victim was an Asian man, approximately in his early 40s. His hands were bound tightly behind his back with plastic zip ties, indicating he had virtually no ability to resist his attackers. A preliminary examination determined he had been shot twice at close range, one fatal shot to the head and another to the chest. In the area surrounding the scene, police recovered several shell casings scattered across the road and along the drainage ditch, evidence that the killer had fired the shots right there before fleeing. More notably, investigators also discovered tire tracks pressed into the damp soil, likely belonging to a mid-sized pickup truck. One detail stood out as particularly significant. According to witness James Mousseau, while waiting for the paramedics to arrive, he had approached the victim to check whether the man was still alive. At that moment, the victim was in critical condition, his body covered in blood, his breathing weak and irregular. Yet, with his last remaining strength, the man managed to part his lips, his trembling mouth whispering two short words, "My wife," before immediately losing consciousness and becoming unresponsive. Those dying words, though brief, carried immense weight. For the investigators, this wasn't merely a statement uttered in the throes of death. It was a rare, direct clue left behind in the victim's final moments. Those two words immediately raised suspicions that this was not a random attack, nor did it resemble a botched robbery. On the contrary, the root cause of this crime might very well lie in long-simmering conflicts within the victim's own family. Shortly thereafter, using standard investigative techniques, police quickly identified the victim. He was Lien Nguyen, a 44-year-old Vietnamese-American man living in New Orleans. From this point forward, the investigation immediately expanded to examine his personal and family life. When investigators arrived at the house at 4800 Centerwood Drive, where Lien Nguyen was registered as a resident, they met Charity Nguyen, the victim's wife. In front of the police, the woman appeared visibly anxious, her face tense and uneasy. Charity stated that her husband had not come home for several days, and she had no idea where he was or what might have happened to him. Based on Lien's haunting final words, combined with suspicions that had already begun to form, the lead investigator began quietly observing Charity's every gesture and behavior. He didn't rush to conclusions or press her with rapid-fire questions, but instead chose to silently note every unusual detail in the house. During this observation, one abnormality quickly caught his attention. The house had multiple locations where security cameras had clearly once been installed, but all of them were now empty, leaving only faint marks on the walls and ceilings. When asked about the camera system, Charity explained that they had been broken for a long time and were no longer functional, so she had removed them. However, her explanation failed to convince the detective. The dust patterns around the camera mounting locations told a completely different story. The devices appeared to have been removed only very recently, not long enough ago for dust to accumulate, as Charity had claimed. This was a small detail, but in criminal investigations, such details often carry enormous significance. Professional instinct told him that this wife was hiding something. Immediately afterward, police began extracting data from all the security cameras throughout the neighborhood, hoping to find any remaining clues. Their persistence was quickly rewarded. A camera belonging to a neighbor, positioned at a favorable angle, had inadvertently captured some highly unusual activity occurring on the night of April 23rd, the presumed time of the murder. The surveillance footage showed that in the quiet of the night, an unfamiliar Nissan Titan pickup truck suddenly backed into the driveway of Lien Nguyen's home. Seconds later, a man stepped out of the cab. He wasn't empty-handed. He was dragging something that looked very much like a human body, which he quickly loaded into the truck bed. The entire action was hurried but deliberate, as if it had been planned in advance. Immediately after, the Nissan Titan left the property and drove in the exact direction of the area where Lien Nguyen's body would later be discovered. But that wasn't all. The video also revealed another crucial detail. During that same time frame, Charity Nguyen's personal van appeared multiple times in the footage. The vehicle repeatedly left the house and returned, over and over again throughout the night of the incident. This detail directly contradicted Charity's earlier statement, in which she had claimed she stayed home from around 10:30 p.m. and never left that night. The camera data told a different truth. Clearly, this wife had not been honest about her whereabouts. When investigators confronted Charity directly with the footage, her reaction changed dramatically. From her initial state of anxiety, she suddenly shifted to fear, her eyes darting nervously, her voice beginning to tremble. Within just a few short minutes, Charity completely reversed her story, fabricating an entirely new account that bore no resemblance to what she had previously said. According to Charity's new version of events, on the night of the incident, when she returned home, she did see her husband, Lien Nguyen, but he had gone straight into the bathroom. Shortly after, she heard him talking to someone inside the house. Sensing something was wrong, Charity cracked the door open to look and saw a stranger holding a gun, pointing it at her husband. According to her, the man immediately shouted at her to close the door, threatening to kill the entire family if she didn't comply. Charity continued, claiming that in her panic, she heard other male voices faintly, suggesting the intruders weren't alone but had accomplices lurking nearby. The story was filled with dramatic details, yet it lacked the key elements necessary for a credible statement. What stood out was that despite claiming to have seen the attacker with her own eyes, Charity couldn't describe any specific identifying features of the gunman. No height, no build, no face, no clothing. She even refused to cooperate with police in creating a composite sketch, citing that she was too frightened to remember anything. This patchwork story, full of contradictions and holes, only deepened the investigators' suspicions. In the eyes of the police, this was no longer the natural reaction of a panicked wife. It looked more like a script hastily invented to counter the evidence staring her in the face. From that point on, Charity Nguyen was placed on a special watch list, and before long, she was officially identified as the prime suspect in the case. Just as the investigation was reaching a dead end due to Charity's evasive and constantly changing statements, a decisive breakthrough unexpectedly emerged, thanks to the cooperation of a key witness. On May 27, 2013, more than a month after the murder, police managed to meet with a longtime acquaintance of the Nguyen couple. Initially, the meeting seemed like it would only yield peripheral information. However, what this person revealed immediately changed the entire direction of the investigation. According to the witness, around early April 2013, Charity had not come alone. She was accompanied by a man named Khoi Quang Hoang, and together they had approached this person with a shocking proposition: $10,000 to kill Lien Nguyen. The offer was delivered with chilling directness. However, given the gravity of what was being asked, the acquaintance initially didn't believe it was serious. He thought it might just be words spoken in a moment of anger or a thoughtless outburst. For that reason, he immediately refused to participate. But the story didn't end there. Not long after the first refusal, Khoi, the man who had accompanied Charity, sought out this person again in a private meeting. This time, Khoi's demeanor was no longer tentative or impulsive. It was deliberate and calculated. Khoi didn't just increase the payment. He also brought items that made the offer far more chilling: a handgun and a pair of gloves, which he handed over directly as the tools for the job. He repeatedly pressured the man to act as soon as possible, promising additional payment in drugs once the deed was done. Despite being placed under enormous pressure, the man firmly refused to participate in this murder conspiracy. That decision would later save him from becoming an accomplice in a serious homicide case. A few weeks later, when news broke that Lin Nguyen had indeed been killed on the night of April 23rd, the witness understood that the proposition from before was no joke. It was a plan that had been carried out to completion. He decided to report everything to the police. The witness's testimony was quickly recognized by investigators as the golden key to cracking the case. It didn't merely add supplementary information, it directly confirmed the long-held suspicions against Charity Nguyen, while also revealing for the first time a second suspect, Khoi Quang Hoang. From this point forward, Khoi was no longer just a peripheral name. He was identified as a direct accomplice and, crucially, Charity's secret lover. This affair helped police connect the scattered pieces, revealing a premeditated conspiracy rather than a spontaneous act. After identifying the main suspects, the investigation expanded to trace the vehicle used in the crime. The next important lead came from the suspicious Nissan Titan pickup truck that had appeared in the security footage. However, the images only allowed police to identify the vehicle's make and color. The license plate was completely invisible, having been removed beforehand. Based on this limited information, police searched the entire registry of Nissan Titan owners in the New Orleans area, focusing on silver-gray vehicles matching the footage. After filtering through dozens of similar trucks, one name began to stand out: Irene Booker. According to police records, Irene Booker was a woman with a history of lending her vehicle to others in exchange for cash or drugs. As soon as Irene Booker's name surfaced in the investigation, police immediately sought her out for questioning. When confronted by detectives, Irene didn't try to evade or deny. She admitted that on April 23rd, Khoi Quang Hoang had personally come to borrow her Nissan Titan. According to her, Khoi promised to return the truck that same evening. Khoi was a familiar face, having borrowed her vehicle several times before, so this time she didn't think much of it. As in previous instances, Khoi implied he would compensate her with either cash or drugs, an unspoken arrangement both parties understood. However, something unusual began to unfold when past midnight, Khoi still hadn't returned the truck as promised. Growing concerned, Booker called him repeatedly to urge him. On the other end, Khoi responded dismissively, reassuring her that the group would return the truck soon, before quickly hanging up without further explanation. Around 1 a.m., another strange development occurred. A complete stranger drove the Nissan Titan to Booker's residence and returned it. The man said little, simply handing her $200 in cash as payment for the loan before disappearing into the night. It wasn't until the next morning that Booker discovered something that left her uneasy. The rear license plate of the truck had vanished. With no other option, she was forced to obtain a temporary plate to continue using the vehicle. From the testimonies and evidence gathered, investigators reached an important conclusion. Khoi Quang Hoang had most likely borrowed the Nissan Titan to use as a vehicle for disposing of evidence. Removing the license plate beforehand was not an impulsive act. It was a calculated step to avoid identification by security cameras. According to the scenario police reconstructed, Khoi used this truck to transport the victim away from the house, taking him to the isolated area where Lin Nguyen was subsequently murdered. After everything was done, Khoi didn't return the truck himself, but had an associate or someone else bring it back, along with a small sum of money, both to conclude the vehicle loan and implicitly to silence Irene Booker, discouraging her from asking further questions. This detail led police to add an obstruction of justice charge against Khoi Quang Hoang. The deliberate act of removing the license plate, using the vehicle to conceal criminal activity, and erasing evidence constituted a serious crime, independent of the murder charge. Additionally, based on the method of the killing and the evidence collected at the scene, investigators developed another notable theory. The person who actually pulled the trigger and killed Lin Nguyen may not have been Khoi or Charity at all. Instead, the shots were likely fired by one or more hired killers, individuals contracted to carry out the job. After collecting and cross-referencing all the physical evidence from the surveillance footage, the crucial witness testimony, and numerous related documents, police determined that the case file was solid enough to proceed with formal prosecution. Without further delay, authorities officially arrested Charity Nguyen and Khoi Quang Hoang. Both quickly faced extremely serious charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation of murder, second-degree murder, and obstruction of justice. These are all crimes carrying severe penalties, potentially costing the defendants most of their remaining lives behind bars. However, the case took a more complicated turn after the arrests. One detail that particularly caught public attention was that Charity Nguyen had fled after being released on bail. Specifically, in August 2013, Charity's sister posted $125,000 to secure her release while awaiting trial. Yet just 1 month later, when the Orleans Parish Grand Jury officially issued the indictment in September 2013, both Charity and Coy suddenly disappeared for a brief period. This development immediately raised concerns that the two defendants intended to evade justice, seriously complicating the prosecution process. In response, authorities were forced to tighten legal measures, including dramatically increasing bail amounts to prevent flight risk. Under the new orders, Charity Nguyen's bail was raised to $1.5 million, while Coy Quang Huang faced an even higher amount, $1.65 million. Alongside prosecuting the identified suspects, investigators also issued a public appeal, asking citizens to provide any additional information about the hired killers. The unidentified individuals believed to have actually pulled the trigger and killed Lien Nguyen. However, throughout this period, all efforts to track them down yielded no concrete results. No witnesses could identify the mysterious gunman, and no leads emerged clear enough to establish their identities. This left the most crucial question of the case, who actually killed Lien Nguyen, unanswered, creating a significant gap in the investigation file. Parallel to the hunt for the actual killers, police also conducted a thorough examination of Charity Nguyen's background and personal life to better understand the motive behind this murder conspiracy. According to the investigation, at the time of the crime, Charity was 35 years old, born into a Vietnamese American family, raised in the United States, and had lived for many years in the New Orleans East area. Before the tragedy occurred, Charity and Lien Nguyen had been living together as husband and wife, although they had never legally registered their marriage. Together, they had built a home and raised 3 young children, projecting the image of what appeared to be a stable, ordinary family to those around them. But behind that facade lay an entirely different reality. Police discovered that during her time living with Lien Nguyen, Charity had secretly maintained an extramarital affair with Coy Quang Huang. It was this illicit relationship that gradually became the source of tragedy, the catalyst that transformed conflicts into a conspiracy to murder the man she had called her partner. According to the investigation's conclusions, Charity Nguyen's motive for plotting to kill the man she had lived with for years did not stem from a single cause. Rather, it was a dangerous combination of financial greed and misguided romantic attachment. This was the crucial factor that made the case colder and more ruthless than any ordinary family tragedy. Based on the theory police constructed, if Lien Nguyen died, Charity would inherit the full amount of his life insurance policy, along with other assets the couple had accumulated during their time together. Beyond that, Lien's death would also clear the path for Charity to openly pursue her lover without any legal or moral barriers standing in the way. What made investigators and the public shudder was the calculated coldness of Charity's plan. Rather than act directly, she allegedly hired others to carry out the killing, thereby creating an alibi for herself while shifting all legal risk onto the hired hands. This wasn't merely a murder plot. It was a carefully orchestrated scheme designed to maximize gain and minimize the chance of getting caught. It was precisely this ruthlessness and calculation that outraged the local community. Media outlets and residents of New Orleans East began referring to Charity by a chilling nickname, the Black Widow. However, alongside the wave of harsh criticism, some dissenting voices emerged from people who had known Charity. A few suggested she wasn't inherently cold-blooded, but may have been drawn into the affair and manipulated by her lover, gradually sliding down the path to crime. Coy Quang Huang, 35 years old, was not only Charity Nguyen's lover, but was also identified as the key accomplice in the entire conspiracy to murder Lien Nguyen. He was a Vietnamese American living in the New Orleans East area, a neighborhood known for its complex web of underground criminal activity. Unlike what his appearance might suggest, Koi's background was deeply entrenched in the criminal underworld. Police records showed he had been involved in numerous illegal activities in the past, most notably a prior conviction related to conspiracy to commit murder, along with charges of disturbing the peace. These were not isolated incidents, but reflected a lifestyle closely tied to violence and the criminal element. Because of this troubled history, authorities viewed Koi as a broker for illegal operations, someone who connected people seeking muscle with criminal groups willing to act for money. He maintained close ties with several local gangs, enabling him to quickly find individuals prepared to carry out violent acts without exposing himself. Additionally, Koi was involved in small-scale drug dealing, using narcotics as currency in shady transactions. A prime example was his use of drugs to secure the loan of the Nissan Titan from Irene Booker. All of these factors demonstrated that Koi Kwang Huang was not merely a peripheral supporter, he was the central link in the murder conspiracy. In this case, Koi Kwang Huang was identified as the mastermind who orchestrated the entire operation. He didn't just recruit the killers, he personally prepared the means for the crime. From borrowing the Nissan Titan, to removing the license plate to avoid identification, to planning the route and timing of the attack. Every step revealed this was a tightly organized conspiracy, not a spontaneous act. Koi didn't limit himself to coordinating from behind the scenes. According to the investigation file, he was present at the scene during the abduction of Lien Nguyen, ensuring the victim was subdued before being taken away. After the deed was done, Koi continued managing the cleanup, including disposing of the home security camera system and the gun used in the murder, all to erase any trace that could lead back to him. What makes the case even more tragic is that Lien Nguyen may have known Koi, perhaps even regarded him as a casual acquaintance. But there's no way Lien could have suspected that this man was secretly involved with Charity, let alone that their hidden relationship had made Koi the mastermind behind a plot to end his life. Koi's cold-bloodedness was further demonstrated after the crime was completed. The very next morning, he casually met with Charity as if nothing had happened, calmly informing her that Lien's matter has been taken care of. What Koi Kwang Huang never anticipated, however, was that the victim managed to utter those final dying words, using his last breath to implicate his own wife. Beyond that, another variable lay outside all his calculations. One of the people he had approached about carrying out the hit had not stayed silent. Instead, he quietly reported everything to the authorities. These two factors, the victim's dying words and the witness's testimony, became fatal blows that pierced through the carefully constructed facade Koi had built. The plan that seemed perfect, complete with hired killers and alibis, ultimately collapsed because of details no one had foreseen. After more than 3 years of investigation, evidence collection, testimony cross-referencing, and legal deliberations, the murder case of Lien Nguyen was officially brought to trial in late September 2016. The proceedings quickly drew significant public attention in New Orleans, not only because of the gravity of the crime, but also due to the controversial legal questions surrounding each defendant's role, level of involvement, and criminal liability. Because the case involved multiple defendants and their testimonies risked contradicting each other, the court decided to separate the proceedings, trying Charity Nguyen and Koi Kwang Huang in 2 distinct trials. This decision was made to ensure fairness during the litigation process and to prevent the defendants from shifting blame onto each other in front of the jury, which could obscure the truth. As Charity Nguyen's trial began, her defense team quickly deployed a familiar but calculated strategy. Rather than attempting to deny every detail, they focused on exploiting legal gray areas, gradually undermining evidence that had been controversial from the start. The defense attorneys argued that the 2 words, "my wife," that Lien Nguyen whispered before dying, could not be considered a clear accusation. According to them, it could just as easily have been a cry for help in a moment of desperation, reflecting the victim's panic rather than an intentional act of accusation. Additionally, the defense team repeatedly emphasized another key point. All the evidence against Charity was circumstantial. There was no physical evidence, no written directive, and no direct testimony proving that Charity Nguyen had ordered or directly participated in the murder of the man she had lived with for years. Under this argument, holding Charity criminally responsible was too risky and did not meet the beyond a reasonable doubt standard of proof. Building on this foundation, the defense constructed an alternative scenario aimed at shifting suspicion to someone else. According to them, Koi Kwang Huang was the true mastermind of the case. The lawyers argued that Koi acted because of personal conflicts or financial interests with Lien Nguyen, and that his romantic relationship with Charity was merely a tool he exploited, making it easier for him to access the victim and execute his criminal plan. Throughout the trial proceedings, Charity Nguyen maintained a calm demeanor, occasionally breaking into tears when her late husband or children were mentioned. The prosecution argued these were nothing but crocodile tears, while the defense attorneys tried to portray her as a weak woman who had been completely manipulated by her lover. In court, Charity denied all charges, continuing to insist she was merely the victim of an armed robbery and had no knowledge of any murder plot. She even placed all responsibility on Koi, claiming he had acted alone due to personal grudges or an obsessive desire to possess her. In the end, after deliberations, the jury delivered a stunning verdict. Charity Nguyen was acquitted of all second-degree murder charges. The ruling immediately shocked the public, leaving many outraged and feeling that justice had not been properly served. However, from a legal standpoint, the jury likely did not have sufficient grounds to convict Charity under the strict standards of criminal law. From that moment on, Charity Nguyen was officially a free woman. Koi Kwang Huang's trial followed shortly after, with a litany of serious charges including conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation of murder, second-degree murder, and obstruction of justice. Although Charity had been acquitted beforehand, this did not alter the prosecution's case against Koi. Unfortunately, during deliberations, the jury was unable to reach unanimous agreement on the most serious charges of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. This deadlock created a legal impasse, preventing the court from rendering a verdict on the case's central accusations. Under these circumstances, only one charge had sufficient legal basis for conviction: obstruction of justice. This charge directly related to a series of acts designed to conceal the crime, including removing the license plate, disposing of the security camera system, and erasing evidence at the scene, all details proven by a clear and consistent chain of evidence. Based on his prior criminal record and his classification as a dangerous repeat offender, the trial court initially handed down an extremely harsh sentence: life imprisonment without parole, in accordance with Louisiana's habitual offender law. This was seen as a penalty reflecting both the danger Koi posed and his central role in the entire affair. However, the legal saga didn't end there. After filing an appeal, the appellate court unexpectedly overturned the life sentence, arguing that while the evidence against Koi was suspicious, it was not sufficiently direct to justify such a severe punishment. It wasn't until 2019 that the case reached its final turning point. The Louisiana Supreme Court agreed to review the entire case file, reassessing how the evidence was connected and its probative value. The judicial panel concluded that although most of the evidence was circumstantial, when placed within a logical and consistent framework, it was still sufficient to establish that Koi Kwang Huang had directly ordered the removal of the license plate, a key act designed to conceal the crime. As a result, the appellate court's ruling was reversed, and the life sentence for obstruction of justice was reinstated. This meant Koi Kwang Huang would spend the rest of his life in prison, even though he was never convicted of the actual murder. Looking back at the entire case, one can see that the legal outcome carries a distinctly ambiguous quality. Charity Nguyen was declared innocent and returned to freedom, while Koi Kwang Huang must pay with the rest of his life behind bars, but only for an indirect crime. Most haunting of all is a truth that remains unresolved. The individuals who actually pulled the trigger and killed Lien Nguyen have never been identified or apprehended. Were there hired killers in this case, or did Koi Kwang Huang and Charity personally take Lien Nguyen's life? A major question remains unanswered. Justice, in this case, appears to have been served, but not completely. And that is the case for today. What are your thoughts on this case? Please share in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.